This week, the Senate Banking Committee will hold its first hearing on the challenges the cannabis industry faces in accessing the traditional U.S. banking system. Joining us now to discuss what is at stake for this growing multi-billion-dollar industry is Cowen Managing Director Jaret Seiberg. Jaret, good to talk to you here. So what are the terms of this debate right now? Obviously, remains kind of a federal criminal activity to bank with this industry. It's mostly a cash business. What's going to be discussed this week? What might represent clarity for the industry?
Well, you know, it's a quagmire of an industry. I mean, what other industry can you think of where you have the Fed saying it's illegal and you have the states, you know, saying go ahead and do it anyways, and the banks find themselves in the middle? And that's what the Senate Banking Committee is going to look at. They're looking at legislation that would allow banks to service cannabis companies that are in compliance with state law. It's seen as a simple way to try to get that cash off the street and to provide greater accounting. And if the added benefit is that it's easier to collect taxes and keep track of all that, I think governments are pretty happy with that as well.
Yeah, and that has been an issue even on a state basis, hasn't it, in terms of states attempting to estimate how much tax revenue is going to come from this legal above-board activity, and then maybe it's been somewhat disappointing.
Yeah, I think you have two things at play. I mean, certainly, you know, an all-cash business is it's difficult to pay your taxes. You know, there's always the anecdotes about armored cars pulling up. But it's even really broader than that. I mean, think about it. If, you know, you're going to go down to the local 7-Eleven and buy a six-pack, you can pull out your credit card, your debit card. But today, if you want to go to one of these cannabis dispensaries in a state that's legalized it, you know, you got to hit the ATM first. You got to bring a wad of cash. And as you think about the competition between the illegal and the legal market, you know, getting this into the banking system really should give the legal side, which is taxed, a big advantage.
Now, what do you think the prospects are for this bill, for this Safe Banking Act that would enable banks to deal with the industry?
Well, I mean, that's what all the fun is going to be about this week. When you think about it, the Senate Banking Committee is sort of the first step in the Senate to trying to see if you can get Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to even consider a cannabis bill, while the Majority Leader is very supportive of the hemp side. On cannabis itself, he has not been an ally. In fact, he's been the major roadblock. And what our hope is that, and our expectation is that if you can get some traction in the committee hearing this week, that you're going to open the door for attaching the SAFE Act to some broader bill, whether it's the spending package that was discussed in the last segment or some other broader bill early next year.
Now, if it doesn't happen, just how much of an impediment does that remain for the industry? It seems like if you look at some of the cannabis stocks, I mean, they've been, you know, kind of racing ahead, gaining lots of values, a lot of excitement in the area, but it's all about the relatively distant future, right? The process of legalization. It's not about doing business today as much. So where does the industry stand in terms of being held back by the banking rules?
So, I mean, a couple of great ways to think about this. I mean, first of all, there's no access to the capital markets. And so if you're involved in cannabis directly in the United States, you can't you know, raise debt. If you're a REIT that wants to play in this space, it's harder to raise debt. So you have a capital markets problem. More fundamentally, though, you don't have a bank account to be able to write your paychecks to. And if you can convince one of the 200 to 300 very small community banks and credit unions that are willing to service these companies, every week you're wondering, okay, is my account going to get closed? Is this going to be the week that they decide that they can't accurately track what I'm doing? You know, that's just, you can't manage a business that way. And that's the problem here. This has quickly emerged from, you know, something that goes on in back alleys to something that's on Main Street. It's a real business now, but it's the only real business we have in the United States with no access to banks.
You mentioned Leader McConnell's opposition to full legalization of recreational cannabis. I mean, does that mean that essentially this is not necessarily going to go anywhere this round?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big hurdle. The question is, what can you do to force the majority leader's hand on this issue? He got what he wanted last year in the Farm Bill, which was legalization of hemp. Hemp is a big product in Kentucky. And so when we think about, okay, what can you do to advance cannabis that is not going to get the ire of the majority leader, it's these narrow bills like the SAFE Act on banking. There's a number of bills on veterans' medical use to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are the kind of provisions that you can tuck on page 2,113 of a massive bill, and you're not actually having a debate on cannabis. The big legalization stuff, we just don't see the majority leader wanting to devote 2 or 3 days of floor time to talking about marijuana.